October 19, 1781. George Washington raises his sword to order one final, desperate charge at Yorktown, and a French cannonball tears through his chest, killing him instantly. In that single moment, everything you know about America ceases to exist. There is no United States, no Constitution, no Bill of Rights, no democracy that will inspire revolutions across the globe. Instead, imagine waking up in a world where the 13 colonies remained British territory, where your great-great-grandparents lived and died as subjects of the crown, where Independence Day never happened because independence itself was crushed beneath the boots of His Majesty's army. This isn't fantasy. This is the razor's edge on which history balanced. Military historians estimate Washington's chance of victory at Yorktown at barely 40%. The French fleet could have been delayed by storms. Cornwallis could have received reinforcements. A single miscalculation, one bullet finding its mark, and the entire American experiment vanishes into the fog of what might have been. Tonight, we're crossing into that shadow timeline. Welcome to the America that never was. To understand how close we came to remaining British, you must first grasp how unlikely the Revolution's success actually was. In 1775, the British Empire commanded the world's most powerful military machine. Their navy ruled the seas. Their professional army had conquered territories on 4 continents. Against this juggernaut stood farmers, shopkeepers, lawyers with hunting rifles. The Continental Army began with no uniforms, no standardized weapons, and treasury notes that weren't worth the paper they were printed on. Benjamin Franklin himself privately estimated colonial chances of victory at less than 1 in 10. The colonies were deeply divided. Historians now calculate that only about 40% actively supported independence. Another 20% remained loyal to the crown. The rest, they simply wanted to survive. In places like New York, loyalists outnumbered patriots. Quakers refused to fight on religious grounds. Many wealthy colonists feared revolution would unleash chaos and threaten their property. This wasn't a united nation rising as one. It was a fractured collection of colonies held together by the thinnest threads of shared grievance and the impossible charisma of a Virginia planter named George Washington. Now, picture the divergence point. Yorktown, October 1781. In our timeline, Washington trapped Lord Cornwallis against the York River in a perfect siege. The French fleet under Admiral de Grasse blocked any escape by sea. After weeks of bombardment, Cornwallis surrendered 8,000 troops. King George III wept when he heard the news and muttered, "It is all over." But history hinged on impossibly fragile contingencies. The French fleet nearly didn't arrive at all. Admiral de Grasse had to be convinced to sail north from the Caribbean. A British fleet under Admiral Thomas Graves fought de Grasse to a stalemate just days before. If Graves had won, if a storm had scattered the French ships, if Cornwallis had received the reinforcements he desperately requested from New York. Now imagine Washington doesn't survive the siege. A sharpshooter's bullet, a stray cannonball, camp fever, any of 1,000 battlefield dangers. Without Washington, the alliance fractures. He was the indispensable man, the one figure respected enough to hold the competing egos and regional interests together. His death creates immediate chaos. Officers quarrel over command. The siege stalls, and then Cornwallis escapes. With Washington gone and Yorktown unresolved, the revolution doesn't just stall, it implodes. The Continental Congress, already bankrupt and fractious, loses all authority. States stop sending money and troops. Soldiers, unpaid for months, begin deserting in droves. Some mutiny outright. By spring of 1782, the Continental Army effectively ceases to exist as a fighting force. The French, seeing the cause as lost and their investment wasted, withdraw their support and negotiate a separate peace with Britain. They're not about to bankrupt themselves for a rebellion that can't win without them. King George III, emboldened by survival, sends fresh reinforcements under General Clinton to methodically crush remaining resistance. Throughout 1782 and 1783, British forces systematically recapture rebel-held territory. Philadelphia falls. Boston is occupied. Charleston, already in British hands, becomes the headquarters for brutal pacification campaigns. The ringleaders, the men who signed the Declaration of Independence, face a terrible choice: flee to France as exiles or face trial for treason. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, the founding fathers become the founding fugitives. Those captured aren't given the mercy of quick execution. Britain makes examples of them: public trials, public hangings. The message is clear: this is what rebellion earns you. By 1784, the rebellion is over. But how does Britain govern this conquered territory? They've learned their lesson about mishandling the colonies. The solution is brutal pragmatism: divide and control. The 13 colonies are administratively separated to prevent unified resistance. Each reports directly to different governors general appointed by the Crown. Massachusetts, hotbed of rebellion, faces the harshest treatment. Boston's charter is revoked. The colony is placed under direct military rule for a decade. Massachusetts becomes a warning to others. Virginia, economically crucial with its tobacco exports, receives slightly gentler treatment but still loses its House of Burgesses. Political representation that colonists once enjoyed vanishes. Town meetings are banned. Colonial legislatures are dissolved or stripped of all meaningful power. The legal system is overhauled. Jury trials become rare. British military courts gain jurisdiction over civilians. The Quartering Act is enforced with iron rigidity. Redcoats occupy private homes permanently. Colonists must provide food, fuel, and accommodation at their own expense. Taxes, the original spark of rebellion, don't decrease. They increase. Britain determines that the colonies will pay for the cost of their own subjugation. New tariffs on trade, property taxes, stamp duties. The economic burden becomes crushing. What happens to American culture when America never exists? The social transformation is profound and insidious. The intellectual fervor that produced the Federalist Papers, the passionate debates about natural rights and self-governance, all of it is suppressed. Universities face censorship. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are monitored for seditious teaching. Professors who once discussed Locke and Rouse now carefully avoid political philosophy. Books are banned. Thomas Paine's Common Sense is illegal contraband. Possession means imprisonment. The vibrant network of colonial newspapers that once spread revolutionary ideas is shut down or placed under strict censorship. Publishers require government licenses that can be revoked at any time. The cultural identity that would have become American never forms. In our timeline, a unique American identity emerged through the shared crucible of revolution. Here, colonists remain culturally British, but as second-class subjects. They're British enough to be taxed and controlled, but not British enough for full rights. A permanent colonial caste system develops. British-born subjects receive preferential treatment in appointments, land grants, and legal proceedings. Colonial-born residents face systemic discrimination. Intermarriage between old money British families and colonial families is discouraged. The social stratification becomes hereditary. Perhaps nowhere is the divergence more morally complex than with slavery. In our timeline, the revolution's rhetoric about liberty and natural rights created an unbearable philosophical contradiction. How could a nation founded on the proposition that all men are created equal tolerate slavery? That cognitive dissonance eventually led to abolition movements, the Civil War, and the end of slavery. Without revolution, that moral catalyst never ignites. The British Empire did abolish slavery in 1833, but colonial slavery operated under different rules. Economic pressure from powerful plantation owners in Jamaica and other Caribbean colonies weakened enforcement. In our altered timeline, with Britain focused on maintaining control over rebellious North American territories, the economic importance of Southern plantations grows. Virginia's tobacco and Carolina's rice are too valuable. Britain makes a calculated decision. Slavery continues in North American colonies even after Caribbean abolition. The institution becomes entrenched for decades longer. The Underground Railroad never exists because there's nowhere to run to. enslaved people face an even more hopeless situation. The philosophical groundwork that Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and others used to argue for abolition, the very language of universal human rights, never gains the same cultural force without the American Revolution to spread it. The failure of the American Revolution doesn't just change North America. It fundamentally alters the entire trajectory of global history. In our timeline, the success of American independence inspired the French Revolution in 1789. French aristocrats who fought alongside Washington returned home with dangerous ideas about liberty, equality, and overthrowing monarchs. Without American success, that inspiration vanishes. The French Revolution either doesn't happen at all or occurs much later in a weaker form. Without the French Revolution, Napoleon doesn't rise to power. Without Napoleon, European borders, legal systems, and national identities develop along entirely different paths. The metric system might never gain wide adoption. The Napoleonic Code doesn't spread legal reforms across Europe. Latin American independence movements, inspired by both the American and French revolutions in our timeline, lose their ideological foundation. Simón Bolívar, José de San Martin, they have no successful template to follow. Spain and Portugal maintain their colonial empires decades longer. The global wave of democratic revolutions in the 19th century stalls or never begins. Without the American example, proving that republicanism could work on a large scale, monarchy remains the dominant form of government worldwide well into the 20th century. The very concept of democracy as a viable, scalable system of governance becomes discredited, an ancient Greek experiment that modern humans proved unable to sustain. Fast forward to our present day in this alternate timeline. What does the world look like? North America is likely divided into several British dominions, similar to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand in our timeline. Perhaps by the 1860s or 1870s, Britain grants limited self-governance as it did to other colonies. But true independence doesn't come until the 20th century, peacefully negotiated as the British Empire declines after 2 world wars. But here's what never happens. There's no industrial revolution centered in New England mills, no Midwest agricultural expansion, no California gold rush, no Silicon Valley. The economic dynamism that made America a superpower in our timeline never materializes. The internal combustion engine, the airplane, the personal computer, the internet, all these innovations either don't happen or are developed elsewhere on different timelines. The global economy operates with Britain as the dominant power far longer. The 20th century's world wars play out entirely differently. Without American industrial might and eventual military intervention, Germany might win World War I, or wars might not occur at all with different European power balances. The cultural dominance of American music, film, and literature never happens. No jazz, no Hollywood, no rock and roll. The global culture is fundamentally British, or perhaps French or German, depending on how European power struggles resolve without American influence. So what does this thought experiment teach us? That the world you live in, the freedoms you take for granted, the very idea that ordinary people have inalienable rights, none of it was inevitable. It was won by impossible odds, held together by fragile alliances, and dependent on the survival of a handful of indispensable individuals. George Washington could have died a dozen different ways. The French fleet could have been delayed. A single different decision at any of 100 crossroads changes everything. History isn't a march toward progress. It's chaos punctuated by the actions of fallible humans making desperate decisions with incomplete information. The American Revolution succeeded by a margin so slim it's terrifying. And with its success came an idea virus that spread across the planet. That government derives its power from the consent of the governed, that all humans possess inherent dignity and rights, that tyranny can be overthrown. Without America, those ideas might still exist in philosophy books. But would they have reshaped the world? We'll never know. Because in our timeline, against all probability, the revolution succeeded. Yorktown became a victory. Washington lived to become president. And everything else followed. When you celebrate the 4th of July, you're not just commemorating an event. You're celebrating a wildly improbable accident of history that changed everything. So the next time you read the Constitution or exercise your right to vote, remember, none of this had to happen, and that makes it all the more worth defending.